Garden, which is a 260,000 square foot brutalist mid-century building designed by Richard Seifert and George Marsh. That was built in '68 and is a Grade 2 listed building. I'm speaking here in support of saving Orchard House at 458 Oxford Street for 3 reasons. 1, we need to stop tearing down these beautiful 20th century buildings. 2, sustainable renovation and redevelopment is both good for the environment and good for business. And 3, we need a new way forward where development versus conservation need not be a zero-sum game. I've been asked to keep this brief, but this matter is obviously very complex. I'm here to advocate for saving Orchard House and helping to encourage a climate where future Orchard Houses are also saved. So I'm going to expand on these 3 points, and thank you. So the first point, we need to stop tearing down these beautiful 20th century buildings. Firstly, once these buildings are torn down, they're gone forever, obviously. The lack of a listing designation does not mean the architecture has no value. Wingate Soho is a great example of that. We still felt that, you know, it's an important mid-century building. It wasn't designated, but we still approached it as if it were a historically important building. Historic England's letter to Westminster dated October 26, 21 also made clear the buildings possess, or the building possesses, architectural and historical interest, and that the proposed development is a missed opportunity to retain, reuse, and adapt the good quality elements of the site, which could represent a more sustainable form of development. My second point, expanding on it, the sustainable renovation and redevelopment are both good for the environment and good for business. Global warming is already an important issue. Our industry must do more now to reduce our whole life carbon in developments. That doesn't mean stopping development, but it does mean trying harder to retain, reuse, and adapt what we have. Our customers, also known as tenants, have already made the connection between their commitments to achieving net zero and their leasing decisions. And developers need to take the high road now if they are to win the trust and support of their customers. Celebrating elements of a historic building tells a powerful story and is a constant reminder of your customers, to your customers and their customers, that they're in a building that helped make a difference. And in case we think this too shall pass, note that Gen Z and millennials are currently just over 50% of the workforce today, but by 2030, they're going to be 68%. Today's youth are tomorrow's customers, and they're fed up with us kicking the can down the road. Speaking to parents of Gen Zs myself, a parent to Gen Zs myself. And finally, we need a new way forward where development versus conservation need not be a zero-sum game. It would be irresponsible for me to raise these critical matters of building conservation and sustainable development without also raising the critical issue of development risk and profitability. What I sincerely hope is, despite the current entrenched positions of both sides, a decision to save Orchard House comes with a balanced view of the risks and costs associated in doing so, involved in doing so. Retaining, reusing, and adapting existing buildings often involves much more risk and can be far more expensive than demolishing and building new. At Seaforth, like many developers, we are fiduciaries partnered with pension capital and institutions who need a reasonable risk-adjusted return to meet their own obligations. If we fail to deliver those returns, the capital will not return to the opportunity. So if we want to encourage more developers to embrace the additional risk, we must find ways to mitigate risk or improve their returns. Conservation and policy can help support developers favoring conservation with accelerated approvals, increased density, reduced charges, or indeed through helping to support and celebrate developments that are making a difference. The more we facilitate the success of responsible developers and developments, the more capital will rush in to fill the need, and the more responsible developers we will create. I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak today, and please feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you very much for coming here and giving your evidence.
Thank you.
Is anyone else who Right, then Mr. Harris, please introduce your final witness.
Thank you, sir. As you know, it's Mr. Christopher Goddard. I'll ask him to take his seat and introduce him. So you should have a proof of evidence,
I do,
and there,
and I've got my appendices to open as well.
because you will need the appendices.
I'm
like,
sure I will.
You're working virtually, which is good. So what we're minded to do is to go through, I think, a series of 10 headings, which we say encapsulate the case on behalf of the appellant. And in those circumstances, I don't think it would be necessary to read the summary. I think we have covered everything from everybody's point of view, and that the public will have a very clear understanding of what the case is. But if you want the summary to be read,
I'm very happy to take that.
great. Thank you very much. Are you Chris Goddard?
I am.
The qualifications and experience you set out in section 1 of your proof, are they correct and accurate?
Yes, they are.
You identify in the proof of evidence your involvement in retail matters. I just want to deal with those in a little more detail, please. I think Inspector probably already knows, but in terms of retail expertise, you gave advice to government and to various select committees examining the nature of retail policy and retail impact. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, over a period of about 20 years.
You wrote the guidance note to what was then PPS 6, which was a guidance note for decision makers, local authorities and inspectors on how to assess retail planning applications, how to, for example, undertake town centre health checks, and how to formulate appropriate spatial policy for town centres. Is that correct?
Yes, I think that was very much building on experience of about 20 years of advising mainly local authorities on town centre retail strategies and development strategies.
You tell us about your wider retail experience in terms of London hierarchy, and the retail market in London.
Yeah, certainly since joining DP9, which is very much a London-centric planning consultancy business, my experience has mainly been focused in large mixed-use development projects in London. I do advise Vista Village, which is the leading brand outlet in the UK, so very familiar with the sort of wider concept of retail brands. But in London, I advised Westfield for the last 7 or 8 years on Stratford City and on planned extensions to that. I advised Battersea Power Station on the retail elements of that mixed-use scheme, Canada Water, and a range of other mixed-use developments with office and retail below. And also, albeit that it's somewhat dated, around about 10 years ago, I advised the New West End Company on the implications for retailing on the eastern end of Oxford Street, particularly arising from the introduction of Crossrail. So I'm very familiar with the Westminster situation and Oxford Street. And obviously, I've worked in London for now 34 years, seen quite a lot of change.
Thank you. And we know from your qualifications and your experience that you're a member of the RICS, and as part of that qualification, you are a qualified surveyor. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, I'm the planning development. Yeah, yes.
Thank you. And in that context, what's your experience in terms of central London office markets?
Well, again, it's difficult to be involved in major mixed-use London office development projects without becoming really quite familiar with occupier requirements. We work closely with potential occupiers and agents on all of our projects, because obviously the risk profile that the previous speaker spoke to of major, expensive, high density development projects in London require a really clear understanding of the market and changing occupier requirements. And I've been involved with a large number of recent major office developments, and in particular schemes that are now emerging in a post-COVID world, where those occupier requirements have changed and are evolving and are becoming even more stringent in terms of the expectations.
Come to that later. All right. There used to be a judge called Mr. Lord Justice Simon Brown, and he used to make you start your submissions by saying, well, Mr. Harris, what's your case in a nutshell? And then he'd make a I won't do. He did, in a nutshell.
You did it now.
He did. He used to do it in every case.
You've just done it yourself.
Thanks. Sorry. Your case in a nutshell.
Well, I won't attempt an impersonation of enough, but I'll try and be brief. Obviously, I have a proof and a rebuttal proof, and again, I don't think it's helpful to read those. But in summary, what I've done, my role as a planning witness, is to draw on the expert evidence of the applicant's team. That's evidence on design, on heritage, on sustainability, and as you will see, so from my main group of evidence, an abundance of commercial expert reports on retail and office development. And I should say, but I may stand corrected, I'm not aware of any challenge to the essence of that commercial market evidence or the contrary evidence, nor the economic benefits which would flow from the development of the Volterra report attached to my proof. I don't think any of that is seriously in dispute. In my main proof, I carry out what I would hope and regard as a comprehensive assessment of the proposal against the development plan as a whole, as law requires, and all material considerations. And in common with the City Council and GLA, I conclude the proposal accords with the development plan when read as a whole. So, in essence, in accordance with Section 38(6), the application attracts a statutory presumption in favour of approval unless because other material considerations indicate otherwise. In essence, it seems to me there are only really two main objections in this case relating to heritage and sustainability, and even more so, the essence really appears to be that at the heart of both is a desire on the part of SAVE and other people that have spoken to the inquiry to see the retention of Orchard House. However, as was made clear in the opening, I think this is understood but is misguided in the context of the situation in this case, that there is no policy protection, and through the Committee Development Rights Commission already exists to demolish that building, as I believe and understand is accepted by the City Council. And again, I may stand corrected, but is not, as I understand it, disputed by SAVE. And this is a highly material consideration to take into account. Going to the substance of the case, though, the heritage issues really appear to mainly arise from the alleged harm from the loss of Orchard House itself as a non-designated heritage asset, and the alleged contribution to setting, particularly in setting of Selfridges. I'd say that deliberately and after a careful review by HE and WCC, Orchard House is not in the conservation area, it's not listed, and it's not listable. And on that basis, there's no impediment to demolition. But in any event, Westminster conclude the design of the new building alone outweighs that loss, and I agree. On sustainability, the proposed development is a highly efficient and sustainable building. And as the applicant's evidence demonstrates, it meets all policy requirements. The development plan policies support additional floor space and efficient new buildings. The SAVE case appears to be exclusively focused on really just one aspect, which is embodied carbon and the alleged policy requirement to prioritise refurbishment and retrofit. There's no policy requirement to do so, and so the countless reference, but the best is probably the GLA Stage 2, Para 12, that makes that point in terms. It's clear that a wide range of refurbishment options were considered from the outset and during the pre-application stage in 2019, and that was informed by design and commercial advice, and of course by Marks and Spencer's unparalleled experience of refurbishment schemes. The applicant's conclusions on this are supported by extensive detailed expert evidence, including planning, design, heritage, commercial and sustainability reasons for demolition. However, it's also clear that the applicant has given detailed consideration to circular economy and whole life carbon outcomes against the policy requirements and because the evolving guidance. WCC and importantly GLA as authors and custodians of that policy have examined this material and the case made by SAVE and concluded that the proposed development meets and accords with the development plan policies. And this so is for GLA Stage 2, CP 413.
Was there a paragraph number? It doesn't matter. It's just if you know.
I haven't got it to hand, so
Yeah, that's right. I can get that.
but of course that's not all. The compliance with the development plan attracts a statutory presumption in favour of approval, but This proposal also delivers substantial public benefits, and again, which for the most part, perhaps save the heritage benefits, are not seriously disputed, as I understand it. And in contrast, even if a hypothetical refurbishment option existed and was deliverable, it could not deliver these benefits as claimed by SAFE. That, in a nutshell, I think is the applicant's case.
Very much. Paragraphs 29 to 33, CD 412, stage 2 mail report dealing with sustainable development and the environment and compliance with the policies.
Thank you. CD 412 and the paragraphs were
29 to 33. We're going to go to them in the rest of this week. So, all right. I'd like to, please, with you to consider, if we can, the contribution of existing buildings at the site and the identification of the need for change there. Perhaps we can start with a consideration very briefly from your experience of where we are in terms of national retail trends, etc. And then we'll go straight to Oxford Street and what the issues there are.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think there's very specific issues to this case, but by way of context, again, I hope this is uncontroversial, but even pre-COVID, following the growth of substantial scale of outer centre retailing, came the growth in online retailing, and COVID, it's fair to say, gave online retailing a significant boost. It peaked in 2020-21 at over 30% of overall retail sales. And I think it's reinforced an overall trend that those in the retail sector have understood for a number of years now, which is that retailing now to survive in bricks and mortar is more about a showcase than purely buying stuff. I mean, to survive in retail, it's about the experience and the quality of the experience, rather than simply a transaction which can take place online.
You mentioned a date when you felt that online had peaked.
I think the evidence is 2021, and it certainly has dropped since 2021. I can find the exact references, but it's in the National Bond report. So.
Should have it, I read it this morning.
That's our appendix 3. So
Yes, I know.
So that by way of a context, so is obviously in the London situation, exacerbated by a number of other factors. In addition to those national trends, there is significant additional competition. I mentioned that I am for Westfield at Stratford, but both Westfield London and Westfield Stratford are obviously relatively recent in the last 10 years. Very, very successful, both anchored by high quality Marks and Spencer anchor stores and Longwood stores, fit for purpose, highly accessible, highly attractive, and very, very successful. But also, Central London and the West End in particular has experienced a particular impact from the pandemic on the number of visitors and the workforce as a result of flexible working. And commanding those wider challenges to Central London are the challenges in Oxford Street. Again, this is all documented, so I can we can find references if it's helpful for you, but I'm just trying to summarise the main points.
I'm happy for you to summarise.
Yes.
I'm sure Mr. Harris will pick them up.
So, I mean, footfall has fallen. Rental levels in Oxford Street have fallen by as much as 50%. Business rates are very high because they were set off rental values in around about 2015, which were arguably the peak. And we've seen substantial business closures, including the closure of a number of department stores. Oxford Street, as you'll have seen, so is characterised by vacant and poor quality temporary retailers, American candy stores proliferating. And also, there's been a long-standing need to enhance the public realm, to create pedestrian-friendly streets, and I won't comment on the smell, particularly post-COVID. I can't smell very much, but it certainly feels down market, as you'll have seen in your site visit, particularly at the Western End. And this is not, I think, me being alarmist, and yeah, I hope this is uncontroversial, but this need for change is urgent and it's compelling, and it's actually recognised in policy and supplementary planning documents. So I was at that stage going to just briefly go to the Oxford Street District document, CD 605.
we should go to that. CD 605. This is a document dated February 2019. ask you a question about that date in a moment, but even at that date, page 9. Let me know the letter. Yeah, I'm just writing down the reference, sorry, that's better, right? On page 9, there are 2 columns. Clearly, we'd ask you to read the essence of this document as a whole, so that there's a summary under the heading, the case for change. Yeah, this is the local authority's own view as of 2019 of their own international centre. The case for change is both urgent and compelling. Oxford Street's current condition does not match its importance and status. And it goes on to explain why. A, do you agree with that?
I do, but I think it's also a situation that's become exacerbated even further in the last 3 years.
Why?
Well, because the post-pandemic and the ongoing retail trends and the contrast between best-in-class retail and what Oxford Street now offers, those challenges have become greater and the environment and the quality of retail has declined further.
Thank you. Is the case for change now any less urgent or compelling than it was when that was identified by the local authority back in 2019?
And the case for change is more urgent, and I would say it's acute. It's an acute need for change.
1 or 2 points relevant to the health of the centre. Going back to your health check advice, the nature of the retailers. You've already identified, I think you repeated, that the nature of what they call the retail covenants is low. Why is that a signal of health or otherwise?
But it's a lack of confidence in the future trading potential of the location. Rental levels falling by 50% and quality retailers not being willing to commit as a result of a number of factors, but declining footfall, declining sales potential, and also high rates. Costs of occupation on Oxford Street are currently very high compared to other more attractive retail locations.
Thank you. We heard from at least one objector that the inspector shouldn't really worry about that because such occupiers, such retailers, if you like, have been put there in an expedient way because the development was in progress, and therefore those units were, if you like, occupied by retailers of lesser quality for a reason. Is that correct?
My understanding is that that's not correct. The Neil House tenants actually paid, the previous tenants paid to get out of their leases because they obviously their trading performance was declining and they didn't want that ongoing commitment.
Thank you. And is the nature of the retailers, just test the thesis, like, is the nature of the retailers which are of low quality just restricted to the Marks and Spencer tenure, or is it wider across this part of Oxford Street?
No, it's wider across this part of Oxford Street. It's evident that the current nature of retailers, there's a number of expedient litigation retailers, but also, sir, and it's perhaps again important to look at the detail of the National Bond Report. What they point to is, if you like, a hidden vacancy rate, and that's the retailers whose leases are expiring, who in the market it's known would want to move out. So whilst we have a high level of vacancies on Oxford Street at present, it's circa 20%, the actual potential vacancy rate when retailers get to the end of their leases is substantially higher, and the detail of that is in the National Bond Report. So.
Thank you very much. All right. Role of M&S. We're going to come to this in great detail later, but the role of the Marks and Spencer store in that failing high street where the need for change is both urgent and compelling. We know from your Appendix 1 that the existing Marks and Spencer is seen by the organisation to be a failing store, cumulative over the years. We come to the reasons for that later. First, do you agree with their assessment that it's a failing store?
Yes, I think that's the inescapable conclusion from the evidence, and they've used quite a lot of substantial commercial evidence that you don't normally have the benefit of at this type of inquiry. I mean, it's fair to say that Marks and Spencer and along with Selfridges have traditionally anchored that western end of Oxford Street. The M&S store position is compounded by its own, as set out in the evidence, multiple shortcomings. It's a poor quality store, or amalgamation of 3 buildings, none of which is built to purpose as a flagship anchor. It's demonstrably underperforming, and that's not only underperforming in absolute terms, but also against other Marks and Spencer bricks and mortar stores. So this is not a malaise of Marks and Spencer. This is a malaise of this store based on circumstances of this store. Its sales and its footfall are both in decline. It makes poor use of its site, which in all other respects is clearly a super connected, highly sustainable location. You can't really this is not a good retail location or location for retailing in locational terms and transport terms. Also, the site's impermeable, very poor quality public realm, and I mean, Granville Place, I think you've all seen so. I mean, in the context of West End, Western Conservation Area, I mean, it's genuinely shocking.
Thank you very much. So just forget about this application for the moment. Just forget that this application exists for the moment. If it is a failing store, what's the general corporate approach to failing M&S stores, as you're aware and as is set out in Appendix 1? What's the general corporate approach to failing M&S stores?
Well, the general corporate approach in the last few years, as clear from press commentary and statement, is that M&S has had to respond to the challenges it faces by closing stores that are underperforming and cannot be made to perform successfully. Now, first step, M&S, as they've made clear, will always look at refurbishment and repurposing and are doing so in a number of cases. But they are a major PLC, they're a business. There's no obligation for them to remain on the high street, and they, in response to the challenges they're facing the last 2 or 3 years, or 3 or 4 years ago, have taken a very, very proactive approach to opening new stores, to refurbishing stores, and to closing stores that don't perform. And that is a perfectly rational approach to take to any business, and clearly applies in the circumstances in this case where this store is demonstrably underperforming and failing.
And again, we'll look at the evidence in relation to that a little later. The existing buildings now, please. The existing buildings, you told us that that is super proactive position. We're going to look through the policies that apply to this position. But again, in very brief terms, are the buildings performing as they should at this location with all of its various allocations and identifications?
No, absolutely not. I think probably the next point I wanted to come on to is talk about what policy would require and expect at this location, because this is not a suburban high street. This is a location at the very pinnacle of the London international centre hierarchy and CAZ. But so it has to be looked at in that context. But really, almost in any context, the existing buildings are simply not fit for purpose as a flagship retail store, and because the upper floors, to the extent that they're not used to retail and it's all underused, are largely vacant. So it's it's a huge lost opportunity for a key site that has the potential to act as a catalyst for regenerating the western end of Oxford Street.
Can I ask, sir, because I don't want to prolong this, were you able to go to the upper stories? Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's all right.
Were you able to go to the upper stories, the NU stories, as part of your site visit?
We spent, I think it was over an hour and a half walking around more or less every inch.
Perfect. Then let's be really short about this. Is this a good use of one of the most keenly connected public transport sites in the whole of, well, the UK probably?
Well, no, obviously not. It's the retail use is hanging on, but is substantially more floor space than is required and it's of the wrong quality to perform the functions that's required. The rest of the building is even spaces that are in use for things like storage are largely used because they exist. I mean, they're essentially functionally vacant and redundant. Most of the upper floors of the building are functionally redundant.
Thank you very much. Let's look at the policy context then, please. And I think you're the only witness to do this, so forgive us if we spend a little time on it. Can we start at the top level of policy with the MPTF, please? CD 61, although you probably don't need to give it up, so it's up to you.
Well, sometimes the words are actually different. I think they might be. Making new revisions change the old word.
I think I'll take something you've not seen many times, so I'll do my best.
Don't seek it out.
So we start right at the top of the tree, if you like, page 5, achieving sustainable development. Paragraph 7, at a very high level, the objective of sustainable development can be summarised as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So in terms of sustainability, what does it say about land use planning and the requirement actually not to close your eyes to the needs of today, but to meet them in a particular way?
Well, land use planning has a fundamental role to perform in delivering sustainable development. And as Para 8 goes on to say, that sustainable development and meeting those needs of the future without compromising the needs of those to come has 3 components. It's not entirely about environmental objectives, it's also an economic objective, because fundamentally a strong, responsive, competitive economy, which is Para 8A, it is fundamental to delivering growth, to delivering employment, to delivering enhancements to public realm, to well-being. And there's obviously a social objective as well, which is vibrant, healthy communities and the quality of well-designed spaces. So there are 3 prongs, and fundamentally they all have an integral role to perform in delivering sustainable development. Sustainable development is not an offshoot which is purely in relation to environmental considerations.
Thank you very much. And then paragraph 9, where the inspector sees and judges sustainability. Paragraph 9, these objectives should be delivered through the preparation and implementation of plans and the application of policies in this framework. They aren't criteria in their own right.
Yeah.
So where is it that you should look for the sustainable approach to development in London, for example?
You would look firstly, obviously, to the London Plan, which is the strategic development plan, and then to the policies of Westminster City Council, which have been prepared in parallel with and in accordance with the overarching objectives of the strategic framework.
Those documents, I think, published and adopted in early 2021.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Can we look at the London Plan next, please? So when we're looking to judge whether development is sustainable in the broadest sense of the word, we're directed to the plan and the policies in the PPG. Can we look at the plan to see whether that makes that's made good, if you like? So let's start right at the beginning, close to the beginning at least. So this is CD 62. And can we look at oh, yeah, we've got to look at 002 first. What is the London Plan? Under the legislation establishing the Greater London Authority, the Mayor is required to publish a spatial development strategy and keep it under review. And here's the big breach of the statute. The SDS is known as the London Plan.
Yeah.
But it is a full spatial development strategy, correct?
Yes, indeed.
And then 005, in developing the spatial development strategy, in accordance with the legislation and associated regulations, the Mayor has had regard to, you look at the 4th bullet point.
Yeah.
Climate change and the consequences of climate change. So running through all the policies in this plan, what do you say that means in terms of the way the plan has been drafted specifically to have regard to those matters?
The plan, the SDS is intended to provide a single overarching spatial development strategy that has regard to all national policy, including achieving sustainable development in the United Kingdom and climate change and consequences of climate change. So it's intended and is an amalgam of all of those policy strands to set out an overall spatial development strategy for London.
Consistent with the NPPF, the London Plan makes clear that it will seek to meet the needs of today and sets a spatial strategy by which to do that. Is that consistent or inconsistent, meeting the needs of today, with the aim to ensure that climate change and the consequences of climate change are had regard to?
No, it's consistent, and it's also, we'll come on to the references, I'm sure, but the London Plan has at its absolute heart for making the most effective use of accessible brownfield London use sites, which again echoes the NPPF, Paras 119 and 120. See a whole section of the NPPF devoted to making the most effective use of sites, because that's seen as a fundamental strand of sustainability.
Let's look at 0018 with that in mind. This London Plan is different to those that have gone before it. It's more ambitious and focused. The concept of good growth, capital G, growth that is socially and economically inclusive and environmentally sustainable, underpins the London Plan and ensures that it's focused on sustainable development.
Yeah, and I mean the sustainable development includes in the word development. It's actually recognising that new development to meet identified needs is in the right place and meeting policies of the plan is fundamentally sustainable. It's not about a cap on economic growth or development and somehow putting an embargo on new development with the view that is somehow more sustainable.
Yeah. And shall we look at what the development plan identifies as the most sustainable of locations? And then we go from there to the spatial strategy and how that's relevant to zero carbon. Yeah. Because we've not heard much of that just yet. So what are the most sustainable locations? Can we look at G2, please? G meaning good, G meaning growth, 2.
Yeah.
Page 17, sir. Okay. So we see there, there's a preface and then there's a series of lettered locations and concepts which are relevant to making the best use of land. First, to create successful, sustainable, mixed-use places that make the best use of land, those involved in planning and development must. See that?
Yeah.
Must. Wait, what does that mean?
What's the fixed policy imperative?
Yeah. Okay. And why is it that sustainable mixed-use places are seen to be a good, if you like, in the terms of the good growth agenda?
Well, it's not only making an effective use of resources, in this case, land in London, but it's also the economies of agglomeration. So bringing people's workplaces, places where they undertake their leisure, living and working and shopping in dense urban settlements, which are highly accessible by public transport, is fundamentally at the heart of the government's social strategy for sustainability.
Thank you. And let's look at where those locations are. Must enable the development of brownfield land. Is that relevant here?
Yes.
And then it says, particularly in opportunity areas, we aren't in an opportunity area, the Tottenham Court Road is one. On surplus public sector land, and then this, and sites within and on the edge of town centres. Relevant?
Yeah, we're in an international centre, and you can also talk about some of the specific policies, but yeah, we're at the top of the hierarchy. It's the most strategically accessible location, arguably one of the most in London.
Thank you very much. Prioritise sites which are well connected by existing or planned public transport.
Yeah.
The site is already 6B, and that's without taking into account the Elizabeth line.
Yeah.
The Elizabeth line is said in the Westminster City Council document to bring a number of passengers and pedestrians to Oxford Street, which will transform the way the street works. In terms of GG2B, how well does the application site, how well does it perform against that prioritisation?
Well, the site, in terms of its proximity to that huge public transport investment, is highly accessible. And obviously, the extent to which it attracts custom depends on whether it's a failing site or it's an optimised site. But it certainly is one of the most highly accessible locations in London.
See, explore the potential to intensify the use of land, support additional homes and workspaces, promoting higher density development, particularly in locations well located to job sites, etc. Same issue?
Yes, absolutely.
D, apply.
C applies.
D, applying a design-led approach to determine the optimum development capacity of sites.
Yeah, and D is reflected in policy D3, which I'd like to say some more about later, but
Yes.
yes, absolutely.
And in terms of determining the optimum development capacity of the sites here, what role, if any, did the GLA and Westminster City Council play, particularly in terms of identifying an appropriate optimised framework or skeleton for the building?
Well, the GLA and City Council obviously, through their development plan designations, identified the site as being within CAZ. It's within the International Centre. It's out with any conservation area, which could impose additional constraints. And it's within an area which Westminster identifies as part of the Oxford Street District and the special policy area, which has a very specific set of policy ambitions for this site and this location.
Thank you. And were you here when you weren't here? Were you watching when Mr. Pilbrow gave his evidence?
Yeah, I was.
And he identified an envelope that, in effect, officers had generated, a generic envelope, which identified their assessment of how the site might be optimised in terms of GG2D and also D3.
Yes, I was. I did watch that.
Thank you. E, understand what's valued about existing places and use this as a catalyst for growth, renewal and placemaking. Relevant here.
Yes.
Protect and enhance London's open spaces, including green belt, metropolitan land, etc. Relevant here.
Well, yes, in the extent of creation of new green infrastructure and urban greening and biodiversity net gain. So, obviously, to enhance public realm and greening.
G, plan for good local walking. We're going to come back to public realm under another heading, but in general terms.
Absolutely. Yeah.
H, maximise opportunities to use infrastructure assets for more than one purpose, to make the best use of land and support efficient maintenance. Infrastructure assets. So we've got the existing two bus services and now the new Elizabeth line. Please do lead. Yeah. Thank you very much. There's that. I think we've probably done enough on that. Can we go to GG6 next, please? This is increasing efficiency and resilience. Two policies relating to environment and terrorism, but also A, seek to improve energy efficiency and support the move towards a low carbon circular economy, contributing towards London becoming a zero carbon city by 2050. Yeah. First, is there therefore in the policy any inconsistency between maximising the use of land, optimising the use of land, making the best use of land, and in the Mayor's view, contributing towards London becoming a zero carbon city?
No, there's no contradiction. These policies don't fight against the overarching plans in the London plan. They're considered in parallel, and they're mutually supportive because new development provides the opportunity to promote highly efficient buildings that deliver those circular economy outcomes, for example.
Right. And let's try and strip this down a little, please. Net zero means that the emissions that you produce in net terms are taken up by saving emissions elsewhere. So that the net zero effect is that there is no net additional emission. And it's identified that the emissions come from various sources. And so I just want to understand with you how the land use planning system deals with this, please. Why is it that having best use of land and having compact cities and having a rational spatial development pattern identified is at all relevant to the issue of zero carbon city?
Well, it's because making the best use of the most accessible sites enables those benefits of agglomeration and complementary uses, reducing the need to travel by means other than the car, obviously maximising optimising development potential on sites that have excellent public transport accessibility, that are close to residential areas, accessible by cycling, and bringing those uses into dense, highly densely developed locations is inherently more sustainable than a more suburban approach to spreading development over low density sites over extended areas.
Good. Let's just try and unpack that a little more. One, if you are going to have growth, and we see that the NPPF and others say that you should, and that growth is going to have travel and transport and other carbon effects, emission effects associated with it. If you are going to have it, and therefore it is going to happen, why does making sure that you put it in the right place save carbon?
Well, because of the advantages I've outlined, that not only in this location are you enabling efficient new buildings that minimise emissions to be created to replace inefficient buildings, but you're reducing the need to travel and you are creating more sustainable patterns of development, which is what the SDS is intended to do.
Yeah, and if you do that across the entire strategic area, following the spatial strategy, what sort of impact will that have on emissions in the round?
It's sort of incalculable. But the point is that we're in this case looking at a strategy to focus the growth of the world city and the needs for substantial new homes and workspace, huge amount of new employment floor space to meet modern needs. At one end of the spectrum, in the most sustainable locations, which is an overarching sustainable strategy for London, and then obviously we get dragged into a very, very micro debate about an individual building and consequences for that building. But the bigger picture is obviously assuming that London actually maintains a strategy of growth and a growing economy and meeting needs rather than stymiing them. The most sustainable low carbon future for London is set out in the SDS and is delivering that growth in the right locations.
Thank you. You said it would have an incalculable impact, a largely incalculable impact, or a small incalculable impact?
Well, I think a large incalculable impact in the sense that it's the fundamental spatial strategy for how London should grow.
But how does the mayor see the overall spatial strategy as part of the aim towards net zero?
Well, it's part of the mayor's strategy, aligned, as we heard from the outset, to the UK strategy moving towards zero carbon economy. This is the mayor's strategy that's been through obviously examination in public and found to be sound to accord with sustainable objectives and those national objectives for moving towards a zero carbon economy. This is the mayor's approach in response to that.
Good, thank you very much for that. Can we then please move on to spatial strategy itself, and we get this at page 27 of the plan. Where the spatial development pattern is there set out, correct? It's called chapter 2, spatial development patterns.
Yeah.
Can we go to SD4, please?
Yeah. Page 70.
All right. So we know that London is made up of these following areas, which are meant to accommodate the vast majority of the need for growth. Opportunity areas, and SD 1 through to 3 deals with those. Central activity zones and town centres.
Yeah.
And SD 4 deals with those, correct?
Yes, SD4 deals with the central activity zone, which includes the international centre.
Very much. And let's look at what it says, SD4A. Rich mix of central activity zone functions and local uses should be promoted and enhanced. The nationally and internationally significant office function of the CAS should be supported and enhanced by all stakeholders, including intensification and provision of sufficient space to meet demand for a range of types and sizes of occupiers and rental values. Of relevance here?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, because we're not simply talking about sort of local suburban office functions. These are international functions that elsewhere. The references will probably come to talk about headquarter offices. These are nationally and globally important retail and office destinations that, for example, will be attracting global headquarter offices. And that's the sort of function that the CAZ is identified to be supporting, not just sort of any old workspace. It's setting that this is the right location for that development that drives the national and international growth of London.
Thank you very much. 242 next, please. Relevant to the way that national policy is to be applied in the distinct circumstances of the CAS, the density, scale and mix of business functions and activities in the CAS are unique and are underpinned by the connectivity provided by public transport, walking and cycling networks. This agglomeration results in exceptional levels of productivity. Why is that relevant?
But it's relevant because this quite compact area is driving the UK economy, and it has traditionally achieved exceptional levels of productivity, which drive the ability to reinvest and provide high quality buildings, public realm, employment, homes, that drives London's economy.
Thank you. It then says this agglomeration results in exceptional levels of productivity not replicated elsewhere in the UK and provides national benefits. It requires different or tailored approaches to the application of national policy to address its distinct circumstances. Is that applied to the application side?
Yes, I mean, yeah, we'll look at policies later, but international offices, flagship stores, this is not a common garden town centre location. This is a location that's supposed to be London's high street and showcase for its flagship retailing and office space.
Thank you. And then one last quote from the reason justification here, 248. As a whole, the CAS supports a nationally and internationally significant scale and agglomeration of offices enabled by the hyper connectivity of its public transport infrastructure.
Yeah.
In terms of the hyper connectivity of its public transport infrastructure across the CAS, how does the appeal site fare? Applications.
Application site is, I think it's one of the most accessible locations in central London.
Good. Can we turn to offices next, please, which is Spatial Development 5, SD5. When we're looking at the requirements for this site, the inspector will know, it's featured in a number of his decisions, that there is a national, but more particularly a London-wide housing crisis. That in areas of the CAS, including the application site, when we look at SD5C, please. We know the weight that the Secretary of State gives to the meeting of housing needs generally and in London. Brentford case and various others. What's the position in terms of relative weight between housing and offices applications such as this?
Policy is clear that London plan policy is clear that it attaches greater weight to achieving office, meeting office requirements in the CAS, because I think it has unique characteristics of its connectivity, whereas clearly, housing needs can be met in a multiplicity of areas, many of which may be less accessible. And it's not just a priority, as we'll come when we talk about Westminster City Plan. It's actually goes further, is essentially a prohibition on residential levels in the CAS, but it's a clear policy preference for offices and a great way to tackle to those.
Thank you. And it says greater weight relative to new residential development.
Yes.
In all areas of the CAS except. That. SD8 next, please. SD6 deals with town centres and high streets, but we're not dealt with by that policy by reason of us being an international special town centre. Is that right?
Yeah, 6 doesn't apply because we're in the CAS, but SD8 does, which is the town centre network.
All right. Okay. Again, we've not looked at this before, Brian. Nobody else has it, so I'm going to take you to it. SD8 identifies the town centre network. How important is the town centre network to the achievement of the patterns of sustainable development that themselves are so important to achieving zero carbon?
Again, for many years, the principle of a network and a hierarchy of retail and focusing development into accessible town centre locations has been one of the cornerstones of the UK's sustainable strategy for encouraging particularly non-car use and encouraging walking and public transport, and again agglomeration economies of putting complementary uses in dense central locations.
Thank you very much.
And I mean the International Centre, which is point D, sits at the pinnacle of the London hierarchy.
Right, look at point D. What's the guidance to decision makers as to what should be taking place in international centres?
They should be the focus for the majority of high order comparison goods retailing, while securing opportunities for higher density employment, leisure and residential development in high quality environments. Although, as I'll come on later, to Westminster City Council itself doesn't support residential development above shops in the CAS.
Thank you very much. All right. So international focus of the majority of higher order comparison goods. Then we've got a very helpful page 94. Don't know how it appears in the virtual world. But a
Figure 270.
that's it, so yeah.
280.
280. Okay. It appears.
Yes.
Now I can turn it around.
Just right click, so
Just right click on it.
then there's an option to
Got it.
Brilliant.
Well, otherwise I'd be turning my hands up around.
It's a short point, so
Wouldn't be difficult either, but this is much.
Yes, your short point.
Well, the short point is, I mean, again, it goes directly to this international centres identifying higher comparison, but specifically flagship stores and office headquarters. I mean, those are the sorts of uses that the policy, strategic policy, seeks to focus in this location.
And if you look under international centres, typically they have 6B.
Yeah.
We've got that, and now we've got the Elizabeth line as well. I think you can go higher than 6B. And we've got high order comparison, specialist retail, flagship stores, office headquarters, government buildings, international leisure culture. How does the application for full sector estate compare with those typical range of uses, the type of uses that we're told ought to be encouraged in SD8?
It sits four square with those. It delivers exactly what the strategic policy, development plan policies for this site seem to deliver in this location.
Thank you very much. And finally, on this trek through the London plan, come back to some other policies later. Policy D3, please. Should we start with 331, which sets the scene? Page 112, sir.
Thank you.
For London to accommodate the growth identified in this plan in an inclusive and responsible way, every new development needs to make the most efficient use of land by optimising site capacity. That applies to the application site as a requirement.
Yes.
And again, D3A explains what the design-led approach is, using the best use of land, following a design-led approach. And we've seen already, I don't ask you to repeat it, the role that the GLA and Westminster played in setting the frame, the envelope for the scheme, etc. Help us please, D3A, of what relevance is that to the application site of the application for the inspector?
I think it's directly relevant. It plays to the overarching objectives of the London plan and the city plan, making the best use of land to optimise use of the site, design-led, and importantly, so it must be the appropriate form and land use for the site that responds to its context and its capacity for growth.
And can we look, please, just at this stage briefly at D13?
Page number, please.
Yes, it's the next page, 111, sir. You read it, Nelson.
Oh, the policy D13, which you laid.
Oh, no, I mean policy D313. It's entirely my fault. Sorry, sir.
That's quite all right.
D313.
D3D13.
D3D13.
It's the very end of
It is
the
the
policy.
Yeah, there's one after it.
There's 14 in the.
So this is under quality and character. So we're looking to make the best use of land, following a design-led approach. Got the role of the design officers in mind. Quality and character. A, for high sustainability standards. Reference to the policies within London Plan chapters 8 and 9, all of those, and take into account principles of the circular economy. What's that a requirement on decision makers in the PLA to do?
Well, it's recognising that the scale of new development needed in London also presents the opportunity to replace outdated stock that doesn't make best use of sites, but with stock new buildings that comply with circular economy principles that are efficient to achieve those high sustainability standards, which is still coming to see in London plan policies, which is what the policies seek to achieve, is efficient, sustainable buildings, including new buildings. It's not all about retaining existing stock and refurbishment.
And just to underscore that, 3312, would say point to at least two of their three groups with the hierarchy in approaches, which seeks to maximise the use of existing materials. Can we look at the last sentence there, please? The best use of land needs to be taken into consideration when deciding whether to retain existing buildings in a development. What does that mean? The best use of land needs to be taken into consideration when deciding whether, presumably whether or not, to retain existing buildings in the development.
Which it goes back to the overarching objectives of the NPPF, the London Plan and the City Plan, that the overarching objectives of the spatial strategy is to optimise the use of sites. And the existing buildings on the site demonstrably don't make effective use of the site. No, that's clearly an important factor to take into account in this decision-making process.
Thank you. And if retaining existing buildings leads to a less useful or appropriate use than the buildings are already in, that be consistent or inconsistent with the suite of policies that we've just looked at.
Be inconsistent with the suite of policies, but it would not happen in the sense that clearly no right-minded developer or investor would fund a scheme that delivers the same or less than what's already there.
Thank you. And let's put it this way, if retaining the existing buildings actually stymied or frustrated the best use of land as properly understood, consistent or inconsistent with the development plan when read as a whole?
Inconsistent.
Thank you very much. Now, against that, bear with me, that's the London Plan position, correct?
Yeah.
Can we look at the Westminster position, please? Because we've got to look at both limbs of the development plan to identify what the requirements for the site are. Help us there, please, with the Westminster City Plan. It's CD 63, sir. Yeah. Can we start at page 20? I think you've got a hard copy there.
I have actually. Yeah. And do it electronically.
Happily, the hard page numbers and the electronic page numbers are the same.
They are, yeah, and that's deliberately so. In that development plan, and I think the London development plan
Now, yeah.
for a long time. They could only put page numbers on every other page for a decade. Right, I've been timed out, so. All right, let's look at the WCC policy, please. First question, we know that the documents are adopted and published at around the same time. Your judgment as to whether they are consistent with each other or inconsistent?
Consistent.
And which elements would you draw the inspector's attention to in terms of requirements for the site?
They're consistent with the overarching strategy, but I think it's relevant to look at the specific policies that would apply the spatial strategy policies, the policies that would apply to house and new office floor space and to retail. So I would start, you mentioned page 20, but I think the note I have is page 30.
Yep.
Which is the spatial strategy. So and it's a bit large really, but it's at the heart of the spatial strategy. Point A, continue to grow, thrive and inspire at the heart of London as a world city. And point 1, support intensification, optimise densities, high quality new development, integrate with surroundings, most efficient use of the land, showcase the best of modern architecture. 2 is relating to residential. 3, supporting the growth, modernisation and adaptation of a variety of business space to provide at least 63,000 new office-based jobs alongside other forms of commercial. And then a range of other policies which are all obviously relevant, but that's foursquare at the heart of the Westminster strategy. And I think interesting in particular the reference to new space and the best of modern architecture.
And then we go to B, and it tells us where that growth will be primarily delivered. B1,
Intensification of the CAS, the West End and the town centre hierarchy. Significant growth in office, retail, leisure floor space. So again, it's just about repurposing. This is additional floor space.
thank you. Can we look at policy 13 next, please? Page 72.
Again, we see policy 13A. You have it.
I do.
New and improved office floor space, 63,000 we've seen before. Additional floor space that meets the need of modern working practices. So it's the qualitative aspect as well as the quantitative aspect. And in quantitative terms, the reference I'd say is paragraph 13.2, which refers to the consideration of the quantitative need. And if you look on the page 73, toward the bottom of that paragraph, we get the outcome of the city plan examination in public. This is now obviously the adopted plan found to be sound. And this takes into account the use for efficiency of existing stock, but identifies a need for 445,000 square metres of additional office floor space as a reasonable minimum amount of floor space growth to plan for. So there we get the size of the challenge, notwithstanding the repurposing, more efficient use, and that's a middle position. It's a minimum requirement, and this is one. It doesn't necessarily reflect the qualitative considerations, but 13.11 also talks about Westminster being a global office centre. And again, we need for large modern floor space, for range of occupiers, hedge funds, financial services. And that's quite prophetically, I think, talked about, amenity rich. Many of the tenants that are now emerging from the commercial advice of the real world, which is that this is not just a numbers game, it's actually about the quality of space that's required to support the CAS.
Thank you for that. Now, we were handed in this document this morning. I don't know if it's been given an APP number yet.
I don't have a representative.
Don't worry, not as hyper efficient as the public transport system. But, let's just call it this for the time being. Lest it be said that this was an evidence topic paper identified at June 2019, which suggested that at the time the figures considered were likely to be overestimates of what was necessary. I want to explore with you, please, where this sits, what the status of this document is. It's an evidence topic paper for what?
But yes, it's one of the topic papers that fed into the city plan process. So it's obviously an earlier stage of evolution. The topic paper put forward, obviously, which would then be subject to comments, to representations and examination in public.
Yes. And what's the outturn of the examination in public?
Well, the outturn in the adopted plan is that a minimum requirement of 445,000 square metres of additional office floor space and the qualitative considerations I've highlighted.
Right. So what's to be preferred? What was a position of the local authority way back in June 2019, or the position as identified in the up-to-date development plan following examination in public, including?
Well, obviously, the development plan is the relevant consideration. This is simply a document that fed into it. But I think the development plan and then matters since the development plan, which are particularly highlighted in my evidence relating to the Knight Frank evidence about the actual demand, about the actual very limited number of staff on site, the mismatch between demand and supply, the limited pipeline of new high quality space in this area, and the flight to quality, which means that it's actually a very limited supply of high quality spaces as the Westminster City Plan anticipates. So that's the current evidence-based situation. In that sense, I think this is largely irrelevant.
And just two more policies to look at, and then we can look at whether the site performs those functions in very brief summary. Paragraph 14, please. Yeah, policy 14, sorry, page 75.
Yeah, this is the town centres and high streets policy. The reference I've highlighted is obviously point C1, which refers to the international centre of the West End. Again, large format comparison retail and new office floor space. And then it talks about the bit of a mouthful, but the West End retail leisure special policy area makes the commercial use to support the West End's role, and then that's the main reference really. So I
Thank
think probably my note is 14, 12, and 13. Really just talks about high quality development responding to surroundings. And then so I did mention a point that arises in 1413. Basically suggested that residential would be an appropriate use for the upper floors of this building. It's just for no fewer purposes that the policy doesn't support residential uses on upper floors of retail in the international centre, because that's not seen as a priority use.
Thank you very much. And finally, back to page 34 and two dealing with station development priorities. Bear in mind all the other policies that we've looked at, both in the London plan and the Westminster plan. Spatial development priorities, West End retail and leisure specialist policy area and top activity. We've got the intensification of the West End retail and leisure special policy area of the plan period will deliver the following priorities. B, an improved retail and leisure experience that responds to innovation and change, including the transformation of the Oxford Street district. So when we've looked at all those requirements for sites such as this and what they should do and how they should do it, what's the end aim here? Is it leaving it alone, small change, big change, or what?
Yeah, well, we talked earlier about the Oxford Street District documents and the acute need for change. What we're seeking is transformation. This is transformation for the better, recognising the past and ongoing decline. So that's innovation, change, quality retail and leisure, diversity in the economy, managing servicing, which is obviously relevant to this case, enhanced pedestrian environment and public realm, clearly relevant to this case. And this is fed through into the two supplementary planning documents for the Oxford Street District.
Good.
Mr. Harris, how are you doing?
Slowly, sir, is the answer. But again, I've discussed this with my learned friend. We're going to have to deal with some of the roundtable stuff. And we've only got this witness programme for today. So I'm feeling reasonably comfortable. Are you looking for an adjournment?
I am.
Yes, that's a good time.
Excellent. Should we take what, 15 minutes?
Yes, I think so.
12:45.